Most people don't lose because they are weak. They lose because they react. Every argument you regret, every opportunity you missed, every relationship you damaged, it happened in the space between what happened and how you responded. This audiobook is not about motivation. It is about control. When you train the gap between trigger and response, you stop being predictable, manipulatable, and emotional. You become calm, dangerous, unshakable. This is where power lives, and today, you learn how to own it. Most people walk through life believing a lie. They believe they are emotional by nature. They believe reactions are automatic. They believe anger, fear, jealousy, and impatience just happen to them. That belief is comfortable, and it is false. You are not emotional. You are untrained. That's the key. Look closely at your life. Every outburst, every impulsive message, every argument that went too far, every moment you said something you later regretted. Those were not accidents. They were habits. Untrained minds react. Trained minds choose. Read that again. Untrained minds react. Trained minds choose. You weren't born reacting the way you do now. You learned it from your environment, from your parents, from social media, from a culture that celebrates expression but punishes control. Society tells you to let it out, to say how you feel, to be authentic. But here's what they don't tell you. Uncontrolled authenticity is not power, it's exposure. Every time you react emotionally, you give away information. You reveal what bothers you. You reveal what controls you. You reveal where you are weak. And the world is always watching. You have a choice. You can keep reacting and calling it human, or you can train yourself and call it discipline. That's the difference. Let's be clear. Emotions are natural. Reactions are optional. That's the line most people never cross. You don't need their permission to change this. You don't need validation. You don't need approval. You need training. Think about any skill on earth. Driving, speaking, lifting weights, negotiating, even walking. No one expects mastery without training, except when it comes to emotions. In emotions, people expect miracles without practice, and then they excuse failure by saying, "That's just how I am." No, that's just how you were trained. Or more accurately, how you were not trained. Untrained minds react. Trained minds choose. Say it again. When someone disrespects you, you react because you were trained to. When someone ignores you, you react because you were trained to. When pressure hits, you react because your nervous system has no discipline. It's not about anger. It's about control. It's not about sensitivity. It's about conditioning. It's not about how you feel it. It's about what you do after you feel it. That's the key. Watch people closely. The loudest ones think they are strong. The most emotional ones think they are honest. The most reactive ones think they are real. But real power is quiet. The calm person in the room always has leverage. Why? Because they are not leaking information. They are not predictable. They are not easy to push. You have a choice. Right now, you can continue reacting and calling it human, or you can start training and calling it discipline. And discipline always wins. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The world rewards emotional impulsivity at first. You get attention, you get sympathy, you get reactions. But long term, the world punishes it brutally. You lose respect, you lose credibility, you lose opportunities. Meanwhile, discipline is punished early. People call you cold, distant, unexpressive. But discipline compounds. Over time, disciplined people are trusted, promoted, feared quietly, respected deeply. That's the trade. Emotion gives you a moment. Discipline gives you a future. You have a choice. Let's talk about responsibility, because this is where people resist. Once you accept that reactions are learned, you lose the excuse. You can't blame your past forever. You can't blame your temperament. You can't blame how you were raised. Understanding is not permission to stay weak. It's a responsibility to improve.
That's the key. From this point forward, every reaction you have is feedback, not about the world, about your training level. If you explode easily, your training is shallow. If you panic under pressure, your training is weak. If you need to respond immediately, your discipline is undeveloped. This is not an insult, it's a diagnosis. And diagnoses are powerful because they can be treated. So what do? First, you stop identifying with your emotions. You stop saying, I am angry, I am anxious, I am frustrated. You replace it with, anger is present, anxiety is present, frustration is present. That distance matters. You are not the emotion, you are the one observing it. That's training step 1. Second, you delay response. Always. Not forever, not silence every time, just delay. Seconds at first, then minutes, then hours when needed. You have a choice. Delay breaks the habit loop. Delay creates the gap. Delay puts you back in control. That's the key. Third, you rehearse restraint when nothing is happening. Most people wait for the moment of pressure to try to stay calm. That's failure by design. You don't build strength during the lift. You build it before. You rehearse calm in low-stakes moments. Traffic, minor inconveniences, small frustrations. These are training grounds. Untrained minds react. Trained minds choose. Say it again. Every time you don't react when you could have, you are rewiring your nervous system. You are telling your brain, we are not in danger. We are in control. We decide. And over time, the urge weakens. That's how training works. Not overnight, but inevitably. Here's what you must stop doing immediately. Stop justifying reactions. Stop explaining them. Stop defending them. Every explanation strengthens the habit. You don't need their permission to be disciplined. You don't need applause for restraint. You don't need an announcement of your growth. You train quietly. Because this journey is not about being liked. It's about being free. Free from compulsive reactions. Free from emotional hijacking. Free from giving power away to anyone who knows how to push your buttons. That's the real cost of being emotional. You are easy to control. And that ends here. You are not emotional. You are untrained. And training begins now. In the next chapter, we go deeper, because once you understand that reactions expose you, you must face a harder truth. Every reaction you give is a signal of weakness. You've identified the problem. Now, let's confront the consequence.
Every time you react instantly, you are speaking without words. You are telling the world what moves you, what angers you, what scares you, what you need. And most people never realize this. They think reactions are private, internal, harmless. They are not. Reactions are confessions. That's the key. When you snap back immediately, you confess impatience. When you defend yourself emotionally, you confess insecurity. When you explode under pressure, you confess lack of control. And the world is always listening. What you react to controls you. Say it slowly. What you react to controls you. If someone can trigger you, they can steer you. If someone can upset you, they can manipulate you. If someone can rush you, they can dominate the interaction. You have a choice. You can continue reacting and leaking information, or you can become unreadable and powerful. Look at the people who truly hold influence. High-level leaders, elite negotiators, seasoned operators. They are not emotional on the surface. Not because they feel less, but because they reveal less. They understand something most people don't. The moment you react, you lose position. That's the key. Think about a negotiation. The first person to show frustration loses leverage. Think about conflict. The first person to raise their voice loses authority. Think about life. The calm one always has the upper hand. Why? Because calm creates uncertainty in others, and uncertainty creates advantage. What you react to controls you. Most people give control away cheaply. Over comments, over looks, over tone, over opinions that don't even matter. They react because they feel attacked. But ask yourself, why does every comment deserve a response? It doesn't. You don't need their permission to stay silent. You don't need their approval to remain calm. You don't need to prove anything in the moment. That urge to respond immediately, that's weakness trying to protect itself. It's not about confidence, it's about discipline. It's not about being right, it's about being in control. That's the key. Let's be clear about something uncomfortable. People test you on purpose. They provoke, they poke, they push buttons. Not always consciously, but instinctively. Humans are constantly scanning for hierarchy, for dominance, for who is stable and who is not. When you react emotionally, you fail the test. You tell them, "This works on me." And once someone knows what works on you, they will use it again. What you react to controls you. Read that again. Now here's where transformation begins. You stop seeing reactions as expressions and start seeing them as leaks. Leaks of power, leaks of authority, leaks of self-respect. Once you see it this way, you can no longer unsee it. You have a choice. You can plug the leaks or keep bleeding control. So what do disciplined people do differently? First, they slow everything down. They do not rush responses. They do not answer immediately. They do not explain themselves under pressure. Speed is emotional. Slowness is deliberate. That's the key. When someone provokes you, your first instinct is speed, to reply, to correct, to defend. You interrupt that instinct. You pause. Even 1 second changes the outcome. 1 breath, 1 moment of stillness. That pause tells your nervous system, "I am not threatened." And when you are not threatened, you are dangerous, in a calm way. Second, disciplined people stop taking things personally. This is critical. Most reactions come from ego, not reality. Tone, facial expressions, assumptions. You think it's about you. Most of the time, it's not. When you stop personalizing everything, your reactions lose fuel. It's not about disrespect, it's about discipline. It's not about offense, it's about control. That's the key. Third, they choose unpredictability. Emotional people are predictable. They always react the same way. And predictability is weakness. So if people know what sets you off, they own you. So you break the pattern. Sometimes you say nothing. Sometimes you respond calmly. Sometimes you delay. Sometimes you disengage completely. Not to play games, but to stay free. What you react to controls you. And you are done being controlled. Now let's address a lie people tell themselves. If I don't react, I'll look weak. No, the opposite is true. Silence unsettles. Calm intimidates. Composure confuses manipulators. People fear what they can't read. That's why powerful individuals speak less, react slower, move deliberately. They are not emotional on the surface, not because they feel less, but because they reveal less. They don't need their permission to hold their position. They don't need to prove strength through emotion. They don't need to win every exchange. They need to win themselves. That's the key. Here's a simple rule you must adopt. Never reveal emotion in the first moment. Not anger, not excitement, not fear. The first moment is when you are most exposed, so you wait. Later, you can choose expression,
if it serves you. That's discipline. This chapter is not telling you to suppress forever. It's teaching you to decide. Decide when, decide how, decide if. That's power. And power lives in the gap. You have a choice. Every time something happens to you this week, ask one question. Does this deserve my reaction? Most things don't. And every time you choose not to react, you reclaim control. What you react to controls you, but what you master frees you. You now understand the cost of reacting. You see how every reaction confesses weakness. In the next chapter, we go deeper into the solution. Because once you stop reacting blindly, you must learn where true power actually lives. You've seen the confession. Now it's time to claim the source.
There's a space most people never see. A moment so small it feels invisible. A pause so brief it feels impossible. That space is the gap. The gap is the pause between stimulus and response, between what happens to you and what you do next. And almost no one trains it. That's the key. Most people live on autopilot. Something happens. They react. No pause, no thought, no choice, just instinct. And instinct is untrained emotion. Pause first, decide second. Say it again. Pause first, decide second. That sentence alone can change your entire life if you live it. Because in that pause, something powerful happens. You step out of reflex. You step out of habit. You step out of the past. And you step into authorship. You stop being a character in someone else's story and become the writer of your own. You have a choice. Without the pause, you don't choose. You repeat. You repeat patterns. You repeat arguments. You repeat mistakes. You repeat regrets. Most people are not living. They are replaying. The gap breaks the loop. That's the key. Let's be honest. The pause feels uncomfortable. Silence feels awkward. Waiting feels weak. Not responding feels like losing. That's because you've been trained wrong. You've been trained to believe speed equals strength. You've been trained to believe instant replies equal confidence. You've been trained to believe silence equals defeat. None of that is true. Speed is emotional. Stillness is strategic. It's not about hesitation. It's about discipline. Pause first, decide second. The strongest people you will ever meet are not fast. They are precise. They do not rush words. They do not rush decisions. They do not rush reactions. They understand that whoever controls the pace controls the outcome. That's the key. Think about every mistake you regret, every text you wish you didn't send, every argument that escalated, every decision that cost you. They all share one thing: no pause. Emotion grabbed the wheel and logic was dragged behind the car. You have a choice. You can continue living without the gap, or you can train it. Training the gap does not mean becoming passive. It means becoming deliberate. It means you stop letting the world decide your state of mind. Because right now, if we're honest, your environment controls you more than you control yourself. Notifications, comments, tones, looks, pressure. You respond like a button being pushed. That ends here. The gap is where power lives, because the pause gives you time to ask one question: what response serves me? Not what feels good, not what feels justified, not what feels emotional. What serves me? That's discipline. It's not about anger, it's about control. It's not about fear, it's about authorship. That's the key. Let's talk practically. The gap is not something you magically find. It is something you create. And you create it physically first. Before the mind can pause, the body must slow. That's why breathing matters.
That's why posture matters. That's why tension matters. When something triggers you, your first move is not thought, it's breath. Slow inhale, slow exhale. That single act creates the gap. Pause first, decide second. You don't need their permission to take a breath. You don't need approval to wait. You don't owe anyone an immediate response. Urgency is often manipulation. That's the key. People rush you to steal your pause. Deadlines, pressure, emotional demands. When someone says answer now, what they really mean is don't think. You refuse. Calmly, quietly, without explanation. You have a choice. Now, let's deal with resistance. Your mind will tell you, if I pause, I'll lose momentum. If I pause, I'll look unsure. If I pause, they'll think they won. That's ego talking. Ego hates silence because ego feeds on reaction. Discipline loves silence because silence feeds clarity. It's not about looking strong. It's about being unmovable. That's the key. When you pause, something else happens. You notice details, tone shifts, body language, hidden intentions, things you miss when you react. The pause turns you from participant into observer, and observers always see more. That's why the calm person in the room always has more information. Information is leverage. Pause first, decide second. Here's a rule you must adopt immediately. No major response in the first emotional wave, ever. Emotions rise fast. They also fall fast. If you wait, clarity arrives on its own. Most people don't wait long enough to let wisdom catch up. You will. That's discipline. And discipline always feels boring at first because chaos is exciting. Drama is stimulating. But excitement is not power. Stability is. It's not about intensity. It's about consistency. That's the key. Let's talk identity. Right now, you may see yourself as reactive, as expressive, as passionate. Those are labels, not truths. You are someone learning to pause. You are someone who chooses before acting. You are someone who owns the gap. Say it internally. I pause first. I decide second. Say it until it becomes automatic, because eventually the pause becomes your default. Not effort, not struggle, identity. And when that happens, people feel it. They feel your calm. They feel your control. They feel your weight without you saying a word. You don't need their permission to change your identity. You don't need approval to evolve. You don't need to explain your silence. Growth does not announce itself. That's the key. Here's the final instruction for this chapter. This week, your only goal is this: create the gap once per day. Just once. In traffic, in conversation, in frustration. Pause, breathe, decide. You have a choice. And every time you choose the pause, you strengthen the muscle. What was once effort becomes instinct. And instinct, when trained, is unstoppable. You now know where power lives, not in control over others, but in control over yourself. The gap is where power is hidden, and you've found it. Now it's time to understand what that power produces, because once you master the pause, something surprising happens. Calm becomes your greatest advantage. You've claimed the gap.
Look closely at the people who always seem to land on their feet, the ones who don't panic, don't rush, don't spiral. They are not lucky, they are not gifted, they are calm. And calm is not personality, calm is not temperament, calm is trained. That's the key. Calm is practiced dominance over the nervous system. Most people misunderstand calm. They think it means passive, soft, unemotional. Wrong. Calm is control. Calm is the ability to stay clear while others are flooded. Calm is the ability to think while others are reacting. Calm is the ability to conserve energy while others burn it. Calm is leverage. Say it again. Calm is leverage. In every high-stakes situation, the calm person wins. Not immediately, but inevitably. Because emotional people exhaust themselves. They argue too much, they explain too much, they defend too much, they react too much. They leak energy constantly. Calm people don't. They conserve. And what you conserve, you can deploy intentionally. That's the key. Think about pressure, deadlines, conflict, uncertainty. Emotional people tense up. Their breathing gets shallow. Their vision narrows. Their thinking degrades. Their body goes into survival mode. Calm people do the opposite. Their breath slows. Their posture stabilizes. Their awareness widens. They see options others miss. This is not talent. This is training. You have a choice. You can keep letting pressure decide your state, or you can train your nervous system to stay neutral. Because here's the truth no one tells you. The nervous system decides everything. If your body is panicked, your decisions will be poor, no matter how smart you are. It's not about intelligence. It's about regulation. It's not about emotion. It's about discipline. That's the key. Calm people always win because they don't fight every battle. They don't engage every comment. They don't respond to every provocation. They choose. And choice requires energy. Emotional people spend energy reacting. Calm people save energy deciding. Calm is leverage. Look at leadership. In crises, people don't follow the loudest voice. They follow the steadiest presence. Calm creates trust. Trust creates authority. That's why panic disqualifies you instantly. The moment you lose composure, you lose credibility. You have a choice. You can train calm deliberately, or you can keep hoping it appears when you need it most. Hope is not a strategy. Training is. Let's talk about how calm is built. Calm is not something you feel. It is something you practice. You practice calm in moments that don't matter, so it shows up in moments that do. That's the key. Most people wait for chaos to try to be calm. That's backwards. You don't learn to swim in a storm. You don't learn strength under a collapsing bar. You train before. Calm people train their nervous system daily. How? First, breathing. Not meditation, not spirituality, mechanics. Slow breathing tells the body there is no threat. And when the body feels safe, the mind becomes sharp. You must understand this. Your breath is the remote control for your nervous system. Fast breath equals panic. Slow breath equals clarity. Calm is leverage. Second, response delay. Calm people do not answer immediately, ever. They don't rush emails. They don't rush conversations. They don't rush decisions. They let urgency pass. Urgency is emotional noise. You don't need their permission to take time. You don't owe anyone instant access to your thoughts. You don't owe the world your nervous system. That's the key. Third, selective engagement. Calm people do not react to everything. They choose what deserves energy. They ask one question constantly. Is this worth my state? Most things aren't. Drama drains. Arguments drain. Proving drains. It's not about avoiding conflict. It's about choosing battles. That's discipline. It's not about being calm sometimes. It's about protecting calm always. Calm is leverage. Now let's address a dangerous myth. If I stay calm, people will walk over me. No. People walk over emotional people because emotions are easy to provoke. Calm people are unpredictable, unmovable, hard to manipulate. You cannot rush them. You cannot bait them. You cannot shake them. That creates respect, even fear, quietly. You have a choice. You can be loud and reactive and constantly defending yourself,
Or you can be calm and centered and let others adjust to you. One of these drains you, the other empowers you. That's the key. Calm people also win because they recover faster. Emotional people carry stress all day. They replay conversations, they relive moments, they exhaust themselves mentally. Calm people reset. They don't cling, they don't ruminate, they don't poison the next hour with the last 5 minutes. Energy saved is clarity gained. Clarity leads to better decisions. Better decisions compound. That's why calm people look lucky over time. They are not lucky, they are regulated. It's not about sensitivity, it's about stamina. That's the key. Now here's what you must stop doing. Stop glorifying intensity. Stop celebrating emotional chaos. Stop mistaking passion for power. Intensity burns out. Calm endures. The world doesn't need more emotional people. It needs more stable ones. And stability is trained. You don't need their permission to slow down. You don't need approval to stay composed. You don't need validation for restraint. Calm is internal authority. Here's your instruction. From today forward, protect your calm like currency, because that's what it is. Calm buys you time. Calm buys you clarity. Calm buys you options. Once lost, it's expensive to recover, so you guard it. You leave conversations that destabilize you. You reduce inputs that overstimulate you. You stop exposing yourself to constant emotional noise. This is not avoidance. This is discipline. Calm is leverage. Say it until it sticks. And notice something important. When you stay calm, others reveal themselves. They rush, they react, they overplay their hand, and you see everything. That's power. You are no longer trying to win emotionally. You are positioning strategically. You have a choice. Every situation asks you one question. Will you protect your calm or trade it for impulse? Now you know the answer. Calm people always win because they are never fighting themselves. They are aligned, regulated, present. And presence is force. You've learned where power lives. You've learned how calm creates leverage. Now it's time to confront the tests, because the world will try to pull you out of this state, not by accident, but by design.
Every insult you hear, every tone you dislike, every moment of pressure, none of it forces you to react. They invite you. That's the key. Most people misunderstand triggers. They think a trigger causes a reaction. They think disrespect demands a response. They think pressure requires urgency. It doesn't. An invitation is not an order. Say it again. An invitation is not an order. A trigger is simply an offer to lose control, an offer to reveal weakness, an offer to hand your power away. And every day, the world sends you these offers nonstop. Comments, looks, sarcasm, deadlines, silence, criticism. You have a choice. You can accept the invitation, or you can decline it, quietly. That's discipline. Most people accept every invitation automatically. They don't even realize they're saying yes. Someone raises their voice, they raise theirs. Someone disrespects them, they fire back. Someone pressures them, they rush. No pause, no thought, no choice, just obedience. And obedience to triggers is weakness. That's the key. Let's be very clear. Triggers are not accidents. Sometimes they are deliberate. Sometimes they are unconscious. But they are always revealing. People trigger to test, to probe, to see where your edges are. They want to know, can you be moved? Can you be rushed? Can you be shaken? When you react, you answer the question. An invitation is not an order. Calm people understand this instinctively. They don't react to the trigger. They study it. They ask silently, why is this here? Pressure often means leverage is shifting. Insults often mean insecurity. Urgency often means manipulation. When you don't react, the truth surfaces. That's the key. Triggers are tests, not tests you announce, not tests you confront, silent tests. And every test has only two outcomes: pass or fail. Passing looks boring to outsiders. Failing looks dramatic. But drama is expensive. You have a choice. You can fail loudly and feel justified, or pass silently and stay powerful. Let's reframe this completely. When someone insults you, they are not attacking your worth. They are testing your control. When someone disrespects you, they are not diminishing you. They are checking if you're reactive. When pressure hits, it is not demanding speed. It is testing discipline. It's not about disrespect. It's about discipline. It's not about offense. It's about control. That's the key. Here's where most people collapse. They believe not reacting means letting it slide. No, not reacting means choosing timing. You are not weak because you didn't respond. You are strong because you decided not to yet. Silence is not surrender. Silence is positioning. An invitation is not an order. Powerful people don't ignore triggers. They file them away. They remember who tried, they remember when, and they remember how. And later, if action is required, it's taken cleanly, calmly, decisively, not emotionally. That's discipline. You don't need their permission to stay composed. You don't need approval to refuse engagement. You don't need to explain why you didn't react. Explanations are emotional. Silence is strategic. That's the key. Now let's get practical. The moment you feel triggered, do not ask, how do I respond? Ask this instead. Is this an invitation? 9 times out of 10, it is. And once you see it as an invitation, its power drops immediately. Because invitations can be declined. You don't slam the door, you don't argue, you don't justify, you simply don't attend. You have a choice. Here's a rule you must install immediately. Never respond at the emotional peak. Never. Triggers are designed to spike emotion. That spike narrows thinking, narrows options, narrows intelligence. You wait for the emotion to fall. Emotion always falls if you don't feed it. That's the key. Another rule. Do not match energy. Low-discipline people always mirror energy, anger for anger, sarcasm for sarcasm, urgency for urgency. That's weakness. High-discipline people break the pattern. They respond slower, quieter, or not at all. And that imbalance unsettles the other person. Why? Because they expected obedience. An invitation is not an order. Now let's talk about pressure. Deadlines, demands, expectations. Pressure is one of the most effective triggers because it disguises itself as importance. Everything feels urgent. Everything feels immediate. But urgency is often artificial, manufactured, used to bypass your thinking. You have a choice. You can rush and regret, or slow down and dominate. Calm delays dismantle manipulation. That's the key. When you slow your response under pressure, you take control of the timeline, and whoever controls time controls the outcome. That's power. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Some people only feel powerful when they can provoke a reaction. When you don't react, they feel exposed. So they escalate. They push harder, say more, get louder. This is not a sign to react. This is confirmation you're winning. Stay still. Let them reveal themselves. You don't need their permission to remain calm. You don't need validation for restraint. You don't need to prove anything mid-conflict.
Power doesn't argue. Power waits. That's the key. Now let's lock this in. This week, every time you feel triggered, do one thing only. Name it internally. This is an invitation. That's it. No judgment, no analysis, just naming. That awareness alone creates distance. Distance creates control. Control creates power. You have a choice. You can continue letting others set your emotional agenda, or you can start declining invitations. Quietly, consistently, relentlessly. And over time, something changes. The invitations slow down, because people stop inviting those who never attend. You've learned to pause. You've learned to stay calm. You've learned to recognize triggers. Now it's time to weaponize the most misunderstood response of all, because nothing unsettles manipulators more than disciplined silence. You passed the test. Now, let's sharpen the tool.
Silence makes people uncomfortable. That's why they fear it. That's why they rush to fill it. That's why no one teaches you how to use it. And that's exactly why it's powerful. That's the key. Most people think silence means weakness. They think it means submission. They think it means you have nothing to say. Wrong. Silence is not absence. Silence is pressure. Silence forces the other person to carry the weight of the moment, and most people can't handle that. You have a choice. You can speak to relieve your discomfort, or you can stay silent and let them reveal themselves. Silence is a weapon they don't teach you because it cannot be sold, cannot be dramatized, and cannot be faked. It must be owned. That's the key. Think about arguments. The first person to explain loses ground. The first person to overtalk loses leverage. The first person to justify reveals insecurity. Silence reverses all of that. When you don't respond immediately, the other person starts talking. And when people talk without resistance, they expose motives, emotions, and weaknesses. Silence doesn't hide you, it exposes them. That's power. Most people talk because they feel pressure to be understood, to be liked, to be validated. That need is the crack. You don't need their permission to stay quiet. You don't need approval to pause. You don't need to earn the right to be silent. Silence is a decision, and every decision is power. That's the key. Let's destroy a myth right now. Silence is not avoidance. Silence is timing. You are not refusing to speak. You are choosing when speaking serves you. Low-discipline people speak to release emotion. High-discipline people speak to create impact. It's not about expression. It's about discipline. It's not about confidence. It's about control. That's the key. Watch how silence works in real situations. When someone insults you and you say nothing, they expect resistance. When it doesn't come, their certainty collapses. They wonder, did it land? Did it miss? Did they overplay? Silence creates doubt, and doubt destabilizes. When someone pressures you and you pause, they feel the shift. They rushed. You didn't. That imbalance gives you leverage. Silence is a weapon because it changes the power dynamic without confrontation. You have a choice. You can fight for dominance emotionally, or you can claim it quietly. Now let's talk about why silence feels hard. Silence triggers fear. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of losing control. Fear of looking weak. But that fear is ego. Ego wants noise. Ego wants reaction. Ego wants to be seen. Discipline doesn't need an audience. That's the key. Silence requires inner stability, because when you're silent, you must sit with your own emotions. You can't dump them on others. You can't deflect them with words. You hold them. That's strength. And strength always feels heavy at first. Most people avoid silence because it forces self-control, and self-control exposes lack of training.
You are training now. You have a choice. Now let's get tactical. There are 3 moments where silence is most powerful. First, after provocation. Someone says something meant to get a reaction. Your silence says, "This doesn't control me." No explanation, no sarcasm, no smile. Just stillness. That stillness unsettles more than anger ever could. Second, after a question. When you're asked something loaded, something pressuring, something strategic, pause. Let silence stretch. The other person will often answer their own question or reveal what they really want. Silence creates space for truth to leak out. Third, after you've made a point. Weak people keep talking. Strong people stop. Once the message is delivered, silence locks it in. That's the key. Now here's what silence is not. It's not sulking. It's not passive-aggressive. It's not withdrawal. Those are emotional. Silence, when disciplined, is neutral, calm, centered, unreactive. That neutrality is terrifying to anyone trying to manipulate you. Because manipulators rely on feedback. Silence gives them none. You don't need their permission to stop explaining. You don't need validation to hold your ground. You don't need to clarify your calm. Let silence do the work. That's the key. Here's a rule you must adopt immediately. Never speak to reduce tension inside you. If your reason for speaking is relief, don't speak. That's emotion talking. Speak only to create clarity, direction, or decision. Everything else is leakage. It's not about being quiet all the time. It's about being intentional every time. That's discipline. Now let's talk about the long-term effect. When you use silence consistently, people change around you. They speak more carefully. They project less. They test you less, because silence removes the reward. People provoke because reactions entertain them. When there's no reaction, the behavior dies. An invitation is not an order, and silence is how you decline. That's the key. You will notice something else. When you stop filling silence, your words gain weight. People listen, because you don't waste language. Scarcity creates value. Silence creates scarcity. That's power. You have a choice. You can keep talking to be understood, or you can speak rarely and be respected. One drains you, the other elevates you. Now let's anchor this. This week, practice silence deliberately. When you want to explain, pause. When you want to defend, pause. When you want to react, pause. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be consistent. Every moment of silence is a rep, and reps build discipline. That's the key. You are no longer trying to win conversations. You are training control, because control is the foundation of everything else. You've learned to pause. You've learned to stay calm. You've learned to decline triggers. You've learned to use silence. Now it's time to understand the real cost of losing this discipline. Because silence is powerful, but emotion is expensive. You've sharpened the weapon. Now let's count the cost.
Every emotional reaction has a cost. Most people never calculate it. They just pay it again and again. Time, energy, reputation, focus, opportunity. Emotion is expensive. That's the key. People think emotions are free. They're not. Every time you react emotionally, you spend something valuable. You spend clarity. You spend credibility. You spend leverage. And worst of all, you spend tomorrow for relief today. Discipline does the opposite. Discipline pays you back. Discipline compounds quietly while emotion drains loudly. That's the difference. Emotion is expensive. Discipline is profitable. Say it again. Emotion is expensive. Discipline is profitable. Look at your life honestly. How many hours have you lost replaying conversations in your head? How many decisions were rushed because you felt pressured? How many relationships were damaged because you reacted instead of paused? Those were emotional purchases, and the bill always comes later. You have a choice. You can keep spending emotionally, or you can start investing disciplinarily. That's the key. Emotional people live in overdraft, always tired, always drained, always dealing with something. Not because life is harder for them, but because they make it harder. They respond to everything. They absorb everything. They engage with everything. And everything takes a piece of them. Calm, disciplined people don't live like that. They budget their energy. They decide what deserves attention. They decide what deserves reaction. They decide what deserves time. And most things don't qualify. That's discipline. It's not about being cold. It's about being selective. That's the key. Let's talk about the real cost of emotional living. Emotional decisions feel right in the moment. They feel justified. They feel relieving. But relief is short-term. Regret is long-term. Every emotional outburst gives temporary relief and long-term consequences. Every disciplined restraint feels uncomfortable now and powerful later. That's the trade. Emotion pays you instantly and charges interest forever. Discipline charges you now and pays dividends for years. You have a choice. Now look at successful people closely. Not loud success, not flashy success, sustainable success. They are boring emotionally. They don't overreact, they don't over-explain, they don't overcommit. They don't waste emotional currency on things that don't grow them. That's why they have reserves. When pressure hits, they have energy. When opportunity appears, they have clarity. When conflict arises, they have control. Emotionally reactive people don't. They're already depleted. That's the key. Let's break this down practically. Every emotional reaction costs you in 4 ways. First, focus. When you react emotionally, your mind fragments. You lose the ability to think long-term. You lose strategic vision. You get stuck in the moment. Discipline protects focus. Second, reputation. People remember how you make them feel under pressure, not how passionate you were, not how expressive you were. If you lose control, you lose trust. Trust is expensive to rebuild. Third, time. Emotional problems multiply. One reaction creates another reaction. One argument creates days of fallout. One message creates 10 more. Discipline ends cycles quickly. Fourth, opportunity. Opportunities don't wait for emotional recovery. They go to those who are stable, ready, and clear. Emotion blocks opportunity. Discipline attracts it. That's the key. Now let's talk about profit. Discipline doesn't just save you from loss, it creates advantage. When you don't react, you see patterns. When you don't rush, you notice timing. When you don't engage emotionally, you gain perspective. Perspective is profit, because perspective lets you act once instead of reacting 10 times. Calm people make fewer decisions, but better ones. That's leverage. Emotion is expensive. Discipline is profitable. Now here's where people resist. They say, if I don't express myself, I'll bottle things up. That's not discipline, that's suppression. Discipline is not denial. Discipline is direction. You still feel, you still process, but you don't discharge emotion publicly. You don't dump it on others. You don't let it steer behavior. You process privately. You act deliberately. It's not about emotion. It's about discipline. That's the key. You don't need their permission to stop reacting emotionally. You don't need approval to choose restraint. You don't need validation to protect your future.
Most people will never understand this shift because emotional living feels normal to them. But normal is expensive. You are choosing profitable. Now let's install a rule. Before every reaction, ask, what is this costing me? Not emotionally, practically. Time, energy, reputation, position. If the cost is high, you pause. That pause is profit. Another rule, never make decisions at peak emotion, ever. Peak emotion is peak stupidity. You wait, you breathe, you let the wave pass. Clarity always follows restraint. That's discipline. Now let's talk about identity. Emotional people identify as passionate. Disciplined people identify as precise. One burns out, the other compounds. You have a choice. You can live dramatically, or you can live deliberately. One feels exciting, one builds power. That's the key. Over time, discipline changes how people treat you. They stop dumping chaos on you. They stop pulling you into drama. They stop expecting instant reactions because you've shown your emotional currency is not cheap, and anything that is not cheap is respected. Emotion is expensive. Discipline is profitable. Now anchor this chapter. From today forward, treat your emotional energy like money. Would you spend cash on nonsense? Would you give it away to strangers? Would you throw it at every problem? No, so stop doing it emotionally. Spend only where there is return, growth, progress, decision, purpose. Everything else you decline. You have a choice. You are no longer broke emotionally. You are building reserves, and reserves change everything. You've learned to pause. You've learned silence. You've learned calm. You've learned cost. Now it's time to talk about training, because discipline is not a thought, it's a system. You understand the price. Now you must build the structure.
Most people wait for pressure to arrive and then hope they perform well. That hope is why they fail. That's the key. You do not rise to the moment. You fall to your level of training. Read that again. You do not rise to the moment. You fall to your level of training. When emotions spike, when pressure hits, when conflict appears, you will not suddenly become disciplined if you have not practiced discipline. You will default. And default behavior is untrained behavior. You have a choice. You can keep relying on willpower in the moment, or you can build systems before the moment. Only one of these works. Training before the moment is what separates calm people from emotional people. Because calm is not decided under stress. Calm is installed beforehand. That's the key. Most people misunderstand self-control. They think it's about trying harder when things get intense. Wrong. Self-control is about reducing the need to try at all. Training removes decision-making from emotional moments. When something happens, you don't debate, you execute. That's discipline. It's not about motivation, it's about preparation. You don't need their permission to prepare. You don't need approval to train privately. You don't need recognition for discipline. Training is invisible until it isn't. That's the key. Let's talk about why people fail under pressure. Because pressure exposes habits, and most people have not trained the habits they think they have. They've watched content, they've read quotes, they've imagined themselves calm. But imagination is not rehearsal, and knowledge is not conditioning. Training requires repetition in low-stakes environments, because the nervous system learns through exposure, not theory. That's the key. Think about athletes. They don't train during the championship. They train months before. Think about soldiers. They don't learn discipline in combat.
They drill it relentlessly beforehand. Your emotional life is no different. If you don't train calm, you won't have it. If you don't train pause, you won't access it. If you don't train silence, you won't remember it. You have a choice. You can keep reacting and apologizing, or you can start training and staying composed. Now let's make this practical. Training before the moment means 3 things. First, rehearsal. You mentally rehearse calm responses before situations happen. You imagine provocation, you imagine pressure, you imagine disrespect, and you rehearse your response. Not emotionally, mechanically. Pause. Breathe. Silence. This is not daydreaming. This is conditioning. The brain cannot fully distinguish between real and vividly rehearsed behavior. What you rehearse, you default to. That's the key. Second, exposure training. You deliberately practice restraint in small daily situations. Traffic, waiting, minor annoyances. These moments are not inconveniences, they are training reps. Every time you choose calm when it doesn't matter much, you strengthen the habit for when it matters most. Untrained minds react, trained minds choose. Training happens in the boring moments. That's the key. Third, rules. Disciplined people don't decide things on the spot. They follow preset rules. Rules remove emotion from the equation. For example, I don't respond when angry. I don't answer immediately. I don't argue in public. I don't explain myself under pressure. These rules are decided once when you are calm and then followed automatically. You don't negotiate with yourself later. That's discipline. You have a choice. Without rules, every moment becomes a debate, and debates under emotion always end badly. Now let's address the biggest mistake people make. They try to think their way out of emotion. That doesn't work. Emotion is physiological first. Your body reacts before your mind catches up. That's why training must include the body. Breath, posture, tension. When your body is trained to slow down, your mind follows. That's the key. You don't calm down by telling yourself to calm down. You change your physiology. Slow breathing, relaxed jaw, lowered shoulders. These are not small details, they are switches. And trained people know where the switches are. It's not about emotion, it's about discipline. Now let's be honest. Training is boring. There's no applause, no recognition, no immediate payoff. That's why most people avoid it. They want transformation without repetition, results without routine, strength without structure. That's fantasy. Discipline is built quietly through consistency. You don't need their permission to be disciplined. You don't need validation for boring habits. You don't need to announce your training. Results will announce themselves. That's the key. Here's something important. Training before the moment reduces emotional intensity over time, because your nervous system learns that not everything is a threat. And when fewer things feel like threats, fewer things trigger you. That's real freedom. Not suppressing reactions, outgrowing them. You have a choice. You can keep fighting emotion every day, or you can train until emotion loses its grip. Now let's install a simple daily training system. Every day, practice one intentional pause. 1. When something irritates you, don't fix it, don't comment, don't react. Pause. Breathe. Let it pass. That's 1 rep. Do that every day. Over time, your baseline changes. Your default slows down, and what used to require effort becomes automatic. That's training. Another rule: never practice discipline only when tired, stressed, or busy.
That's not training, that's testing. Training happens when things are calm, because discipline built in calm shows up in chaos. That's the key. Most people test themselves daily without ever training. They fail repeatedly and think something is wrong with them. Nothing is wrong with you. You were just never trained. And now you are. You have a choice. You can continue living reactively and blaming circumstances, or you can live deliberately and take responsibility. Training is responsibility in action. Now let's lock this chapter in. From today forward, you stop expecting yourself to perform without preparation. You respect the process. You train before the moment, not inside it. Because inside the moment, it's already too late. You've learned the cost of emotion. You've learned the value of calm. You've learned the power of silence. You've learned the necessity of training. Now it's time to turn inward. Because the final battlefield is not the world, it's your own perception. You've built the system. Now let's refine awareness.
Most people talk too much, not because they are confident, but because they are seeking relief. Relief from judgment, relief from misunderstanding, relief from discomfort. So they explain. And every unnecessary explanation is a leak of power. That's the key. You do not owe clarity to people who have not earned context. You do not owe explanations to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. And you do not owe your energy to people who are not invested in your outcome. You have a choice. You can keep explaining yourself to feel momentarily understood, or you can stop explaining and remain grounded. One weakens you, one strengthens you. Most people explain because they fear being misjudged. But here's the truth. People will judge you anyway. So the question is not, will they judge me? The question is, do they qualify for an explanation? That's the key. Unqualified people include those who don't listen, those who interrupt, those who twist your words, those who already made up their mind, those who benefit from your self-doubt. Explaining to these people is not communication, it's submission. And submission, disguised as politeness, is still submission. You have a choice. You can speak to be respected or speak to be relieved. You can't have both. That's the key. Let's be clear about something uncomfortable. The more you explain, the weaker your position appears. Why? Because explanations signal insecurity. They signal that you need approval, that you need agreement, that you need permission. You don't. It's not about being misunderstood. It's about being disciplined. It's not about clarity. It's about self-respect. That's the key. Powerful people do not over-clarify. They state, they decide, they move. If someone misunderstands them on purpose, they let it happen. Because chasing understanding from the wrong people is a losing game. You don't need their permission to live your values. You don't need validation to make your choices. You don't need approval to protect your inner state. Now let's talk about why explaining feels so tempting. Explaining gives you the illusion of control. You think if you just say it better, they'll finally get it. They won't. Because the problem is not your explanation, it's their intention. That's the key. People who want to understand ask questions. People who want to judge ask traps. You must learn to tell the difference. And when you see it, you stop feeding it. Silence is often the strongest response to a bad faith question. Not because you don't have an answer, but because they don't deserve one. You have a choice. You can keep handing your power away sentence by sentence, or you can keep it by saying less. Now let's get practical. Here are 3 moments where you must stop explaining immediately. First, when you feel defensive. Defensiveness is a signal. It means your ego is activated, and ego never leads to clarity. When you feel the urge to defend, pause. That pause protects your position.
Second, when the listener has no authority. If someone has no influence over your future, your growth, or your decisions, their opinion does not require explanation. Not everything deserves engagement. That's discipline. Third, when explaining doesn't change outcomes. If nothing will change regardless of what you say, stop talking. Words without impact are emotional discharge. It's not about being right, it's about being effective. That's the key. Let's address a common fear. If I don't explain, I'll look guilty. No. Guilt comes from behavior, not silence. Calm silence often looks like confidence. People project guilt because they are used to emotional reactions. Your stillness disrupts their expectations. That's power. You don't need their permission to remain unreadable. You don't need approval to be selective with your words. You don't need validation to protect your inner state. Now let's reframe explanations completely. Explanations are tools, not obligations. You use tools only when they serve the task. You don't use a hammer for every problem. Likewise, you don't use explanations for every interaction. Disciplined people explain upward, not sideways, not downward. They explain to mentors, to decision makers, to people who are aligned. Everyone else gets brevity. That's the key. Here's a simple rule. If someone misunderstands you and it costs you nothing, let them. Peace is more valuable than being understood by everyone. You have a choice. You can keep correcting every perception, or you can protect your energy. Energy saved becomes focus. Focus becomes progress. Now let's anchor this chapter. From today forward, before you explain anything, ask one question. Is this person qualified to receive this explanation? If the answer is no, you stop. No arguing, no clarifying, no defending. You move on. And something will happen. People will either adjust or remove themselves. Both outcomes are wins, because you are no longer leaking power to unqualified audiences. You've learned to pause, you've learned silence, you've learned calm, you've learned training, you've learned restraint. Now it's time to connect all of it to the most basic biological lever you control, because discipline does not start in the mind, it starts in the body. You stopped explaining, now you must stabilize the source.
Before every reaction, before every decision, before every word, there is breath. And most people ignore it. That's the key. They try to control their thoughts while their body is panicking. They try to sound calm while their nervous system is hijacked. It never works. You cannot think your way out of a physiological problem. You must breathe first. Always. You have a choice. You can answer from a rushed body or from a regulated one. One creates problems. The other creates power. Breath is the fastest way to reclaim control, because breath speaks directly to the nervous system. Fast breath tells the body, we are in danger. Slow breath tells the body, we are safe. And when the body feels safe, the mind becomes clear. That's the key. Most emotional reactions are not emotional at all. They are physical. Tight chest, shallow breathing, clenched jaw, raised shoulders. That physical state decides your behavior before your logic even arrives. So if you don't control your breath, you don't control your response. It's not about anger, it's about discipline. It's not about intelligence, it's about regulation. That's the key. Calm people are not calmer mentally, they are calmer physically. They breathe differently. And because they breathe differently, they respond differently. You have a choice. You can keep reacting from tension, or you can reset your body before you speak. Let's make this practical. The rule is simple. Never answer on the first breath. Never. The first breath is automatic. It belongs to emotion. You wait for the second. Second breath in, second breath out. That pause is the gap. Breathe before you answer. Always. Say it again. Breathe before you answer. Always. That one rule will prevent more damage than any advice you've ever heard, because it slows time. And whoever slows time controls the moment. That's leverage. Breathing buys you seconds. Seconds buy you clarity. Clarity buys you choice. You have a choice. Now let's address resistance. People say, "I don't have time to breathe." That's the lie. If you don't have time to breathe, you definitely don't have time to react, because reactions create cleanup, apologies, explanations, consequences. Breathing takes seconds. Damage takes days. That's the key. Here's another truth. The world will try to rush you. Questions fired fast, deadlines imposed suddenly, pressure framed as urgency. All of it is designed to bypass your breathing. Because when you stop breathing deeply, you stop thinking clearly. You don't need their permission to pause. You don't need approval to take a breath. You don't owe anyone instant access to your response. Breath is not delay. Breath is preparation. Now let's talk about mechanics. This is not meditation. This is control. When triggered, do this. Inhale through your nose for 4 seconds. Exhale through your mouth for 6 seconds. Longer exhale than inhale. Why? Because long exhales activate calm. Do this once, sometimes twice. That's it. You've just reset your nervous system enough to choose. That's the key. You don't need a quiet room. You don't need to close your eyes. You don't need to announce anything. Breathing is invisible, which makes it powerful. Now let's talk about what happens when you don't breathe. You interrupt, you escalate, you over-explain, you defend. Not because you're weak, but because your body is flooded. Emotion hijacks language. That's why people say things they don't mean. Breath prevents regret. It's not about flaw, it's about discipline. That's the key. Calm people don't avoid emotion. They process it through breath. They don't suppress, they regulate. Big difference. Suppression builds pressure. Regulation releases it. Breathing is regulation. You have a choice. Now let's connect breath to everything you've learned so far. The pause begins with breath. Silence is supported by breath. Calm is maintained by breath. Training is anchored in breath. Breath is the foundation. Without it, everything else collapses. That's why this chapter matters. Most people look for complex strategies when the most powerful tool has been with them since birth. They just never trained it. You are training now. That's the key. Here's a rule you must install. Anytime your heart rate is elevated, you do not speak, you breathe. Anytime you feel rushed, you breathe. Anytime you feel defensive, you breathe. Breath comes first, words come second. Breathe before you answer, always. Now let's deal with ego. Ego hates breathing because breathing slows things down. Ego wants speed. Ego wants dominance. Ego wants reaction. Discipline wants control. When you choose breath, you choose discipline over ego. That choice rewires identity. Over time, people notice something. You don't rush. You don't snap. You don't stumble over words. Your presence feels grounded. Not because you're trying, but because your body is stable. Stability is authority. That's the key. Now let's anchor a daily practice. 3 times a day, breathe deliberately for 1 minute. Not when stressed, when calm. This trains your baseline, so when stress arrives, your body recognizes the pattern. Training before the moment, not inside it. You already learned this. Breath is how you apply it. You have a choice. You can let situations steal your breath and your power with it, or you can protect your breath and control the outcome. One leads to chaos, the other to mastery. Now let's close this chapter with truth. If you master your breath, you master your response. If you master your response, you master your life. Everything begins here. You no longer react blindly. You pause, you breathe, you decide.
You've trained your body. Now it's time to sharpen your awareness, because the final stage of discipline is perception itself. You've slowed the body. Now slow the mind.
Anger feels powerful. That's why people trust it. But anger is not power. Anger is a pattern, and patterns are predictable. That's the key. The moment anger enters the room, your options shrink. Your tone hardens, your timing rushes, your thinking narrows. And anyone watching knows exactly what comes next. That's why anger is dangerous. Not because it's intense, but because it's obvious. Anger makes you readable. Readable people are controllable. What you react to controls you. You have a choice. You can keep using anger and let others steer you, or you can step out of the pattern and become unpredictable. Only one of these creates leverage. That's the key. Think about how anger works. It doesn't invent new behavior. It repeats old behavior. Raised voice, short sentences, defensiveness, ultimatums, regret. Different situations, same reaction. That repetition is a script. And once someone learns your script, they can trigger it on demand. They know what buttons to press. They know when to push. They know how far to go. Anger is the easiest emotion to manipulate. That's why manipulators love it. You have a choice. You can keep handing them the manual, or you can close the book. Anger makes you predictable. Say it again. Anger makes you predictable. Calm makes you unreadable, and unreadable people are hard to control. That's the key. Most people justify anger by calling it honesty. I'm just being real. I'm passionate. I don't tolerate disrespect. But look closely. Anger doesn't protect boundaries. It exposes insecurity. True boundaries don't need volume. They need consistency. It's not about disrespect. It's about discipline. It's not about being right. It's about being in control. That's the key. Let's be honest. When you're angry, you feel righteous. You feel justified. But righteousness is not strategy. Righteousness blinds you to consequences. Anger feels like clarity, but it's actually tunnel vision. You stop seeing options. You stop seeing timing. You stop seeing leverage. You just want release. Release is expensive. You already learned that. Emotion is expensive. Discipline is profitable. Anger spends fast and charges interest later. You have a choice. Now let's talk about the real danger. Anger trains your opponents. Every angry reaction teaches people how to handle you. They learn when to disengage, when to provoke, when to wait you out. They learn your thresholds. And once thresholds are known, pressure becomes precise. That's why anger is a liability in negotiations, leadership, and life. Predictability is vulnerability. That's the key. Calm people don't remove emotion, they delay it. They refuse to show their hand first. They understand a simple truth. The first person to show emotion loses position, especially anger, because anger announces urgency, and urgency signals weakness. You don't need their permission to stay composed. You don't need approval to withhold emotion. You don't need validation to protect your leverage. Now let's get practical. If anger makes you predictable, what makes you unpredictable? Pause, silence, delay, neutral tone. These break patterns. When someone expects anger and gets nothing, their script fails. They hesitate, they question, they reveal more. That's leverage. That's the key. Here's a rule you must adopt. Never respond with anger to someone who wants a reaction. That's exactly what they want. Anger rewards provocation. Silence punishes it. When you stay calm, you force the other person to escalate or retreat. Either way, they expose themselves. You remain centered. You have a choice. Now let's deal with the inner battle. Anger feels fast. Control feels slow. Anger feels decisive.
Discipline feels restrained. That's why anger is tempting. But ask yourself this: how often has anger actually improved your outcomes? Not how it made you feel, but what it produced. Better relationships, better decisions, better results, or more cleanup? More explanations, more apologies, more damage control. That's the key. Anger is reactive strength. Discipline is proactive power. One looks strong in the moment, the other wins long term. It's not about suppression, it's about selection. You choose when to express, you choose when to act, you choose when to speak. That choice disappears with anger. You have a choice. Now here's a critical instruction. The moment you feel anger rising, do not try to be calm. That's too late. Instead, do this. Label it. Say internally, anger is here. That separation matters. You are no longer angry. Anger is present. Presence can be managed. Identity cannot. That's the key. Then you breathe. You already know this. Long exhale, slow body, still face. You don't argue with anger. You outlast it. Anger burns hot and fast. Discipline burns steady. If you don't feed anger, it dies. Every time. Now let's talk identity. People who identify as hot-headed stay hot-headed. People who identify as direct stay reactive. Identity locks behavior. So you change the label. You are not someone who gets angry. You are someone who notices anger and chooses differently. That's discipline. You don't need their permission to change your identity. You don't need approval to mature emotionally. You don't need witnesses to your growth. Now let's anchor this chapter. From today forward, anger is a signal, not a command. A signal that something matters. A signal to slow down. A signal to protect leverage. Not a green light to react. An invitation is not an order. Anger invites you to be predictable. You decline. Quietly. You have a choice. Every time anger shows up, you either repeat the past or train the future. One keeps you readable, the other makes you formidable. You now understand the trap. Anger makes you predictable, and predictability is weakness. The next step is awareness. Because once you stop reacting in anger, you must learn to see clearly before you decide anything at all. You've slowed the body, you've mastered the pause, you've disarmed anger. Now refine perception.
Most people don't see the world. They judge it. Instantly, automatically, emotionally. That's the habit. And that habit keeps them reactive. That's the key. Judgment feels like clarity, but judgment is a shortcut, and shortcuts skip truth. Observation is slower, quieter, more demanding, and that's why it works. You have a choice. You can judge fast and react wrong, or you can observe first and decide well. One keeps you emotional, the other makes you dangerous, in a calm way. That's the key. Judgment collapses information. Observation expands it. When you judge, you label. When you label, you stop looking. You assume motives. You assume intent. You assume disrespect. Assumptions ignite emotion. Observation cools it. It's not about being passive, it's about being precise. It's not about empathy, it's about discipline. That's the key. Think about every conflict you've had. Most of them escalated because of a story you told yourself. He did that on purpose. She's disrespecting me. They're trying to control me. Maybe, maybe not. But the moment you judge, you lock into one explanation and close the door on others. That's how people trap themselves. You have a choice. You can replace stories with data. Observation is data. Tone, timing, context, patterns. Judgment ignores data because it wants resolution now. Discipline tolerates uncertainty to gain accuracy later. That's the key. Observe first, judge later. Say it again. Observe first, judge later.
Calm people are not calm because they don't care. They are calm because they don't rush conclusions. They let the picture form. They understand a simple rule. You can't see clearly when you're busy reacting. Observation requires space. Space requires silence. Silence requires discipline. You've been training all three. Now you apply them here. You don't need their permission to stop judging instantly. You don't need approval to take time before deciding. You don't need validation to say, "I don't know yet." "I don't know yet" is a power statement. That's the key. Judgment is often ego in disguise. Ego wants to be right. Ego wants to be fast. Ego wants certainty. Discipline wants accuracy. Accuracy wins long term. Think about leaders, strategists, negotiators. They ask questions, they listen, they watch. They don't announce conclusions early. Why? Because early judgment limits options. Late judgment, informed judgment, creates leverage. That's the key. Let's make this practical. The moment something happens, a comment, a look, a delay, your mind wants to judge. You interrupt that impulse. You say internally, "Observe." That single word creates distance. Distance creates control. Control creates choice. You have a choice. Here's what observation looks like in real time. Instead of "they're disrespecting me," you observe they raised their voice. Instead of "this is unacceptable," you observe the deadline changed. Instead of "they're trying to manipulate me," you observe they're repeating urgency. Facts first, interpretation later. That's discipline. It's not about being naive, it's about being accurate. That's the key. Judgment also fuels emotion because it personalizes everything. Observation depersonalizes. You stop making everything about you. You see systems, patterns, incentives. And when you see incentives, you see truth. People do what benefits them, not what offends you. Once you understand that, anger fades, clarity replaces it. That's power. You have a choice. You can keep taking things personally, or you can start seeing clearly. One drains you, one frees you. Now let's talk about timing. Judgment closes doors. Observation keeps them open. When you judge too early, you commit to a response before you have all the information. That's how people trap themselves into unnecessary battles. Observation buys you time. Time reveals intentions. People always reveal themselves if you let them talk long enough. Silence plus observation is an interrogation without words. That's the key. Now let's deal with fear. People fear observation because it delays action. They worry they'll look weak, but weakness is reacting blindly. Strength is waiting deliberately. You don't need their permission to take time. You don't need approval to observe quietly. You don't need witnesses to your restraint. Here's a rule you must install. Never judge in the first moment. Never. The first moment is emotional. The second moment is clearer. The third moment is decisive. You wait for at least the second. That pause protects you. That's the key. Another rule. If you feel a strong emotion, you are not seeing clearly. Emotion clouds perception. So when emotion spikes, observation becomes mandatory, not optional. You pause, you breathe, you watch. You let the picture sharpen. That's discipline. Now let's address a common mistake. People think observation means inaction. No. Observation means delayed action. Action informed by reality, not assumption. When you act after observation, your actions are cleaner. Fewer words, fewer mistakes, more impact. Calm people don't act less, they act better. That's the key. Observation also reveals something else. Most situations are not urgent, they just feel urgent. Urgency is often emotional theater. When you observe, the theater collapses. You see what actually matters, and you ignore the rest. You have a choice. You can keep reacting to noise, Or you can start responding to signal. One exhausts you, one empowers you. Now let's anchor this chapter. From today forward, your sequence is fixed. Observe, pause, breathe, then decide. Not decide, then justify. Observe first, judge later. Say it until it becomes instinct, because instinct, when trained, is power. You've learned to pause. You've learned to breathe. You've learned silence. You've learned calm. You've learned observation. Now there is one final system to address. Because even with awareness, your body can sabotage you if it's not regulated. You see clearly now, but clarity needs a stable base. You've refined perception. Now stabilize the source.
If you remember one thing from this audiobook, remember this. Nothing in your life improves until your reactions are under control. The world will always test you. People will provoke you. Pressure will increase. But power is not loud. Power is not emotional. Power pauses. From today forward, you do not rush. You do not explain. You do not react. You breathe. You observe. You choose. Train the gap. Live in the pause. And let everyone else wonder how you became so untouchable. Now close this audiobook and practice silence in the next moment that tries to pull you out of control.